to discuss shield and see a Faraday shield or cage in action. We're going to start off with a metal can, here a coffee can, and use that as an example of a Faraday cage. And the surrounding metal provides a shield from electromagnetic fields reaching the interior, even with very high voltage power supply. But before we do that, let's have a look at static electricity. So if you rub here a rubber rod with an acrylic cloth, both become charged. Electrons rub off the fibers of the cloth, so you're left with a positive charge, and the negative charge builds up on the rod. Number two, if you hold that rod near something very lightweight, like small pieces of tissue paper, it will actually attract them to it. And indeed, a very thin stream of water, but don't touch the water with the charged rod. And after a while, the charge will dissipate. We're also going to look at the high voltage electricity to set up our Faraday cage. And here it's the Van de Graaff electrostatic generator. And it's going to use static electricity, can I say on steroids here, to produce a very high voltage. But care should only be used by trained teachers. So number one, you have the top of the Van de Graaff generator, which is the dome, can be spherical, different shapes, hollow metal cylinder. And inside that, you've got a roller that is made of acrylic, like the fabric before, and a continuous rubber belt which goes over it. And in number two, that movement generates static electricity, but lots and lots of it. And then in number three, you can see some little lines above the roller like a comb, and that is conducting the charge out towards the outside of the Van de Graaff generator. And it can produce, one sort of desk size, can produce 100 kilovolts and is dangerous, so please go very carefully. So with our coffee can Faraday cage, you'll can pause to look at the materials that are needed here. And this is what we're going to do with the materials. A piece of 20 gauge or lower copper wire bent at an angle nearly 90 degrees near one end and soldered to the middle of the outside of the can. And then 15 centimeter length of thin nylon thread attached to a cork and suspend that from the end near the bend. And do that with the second cork, so they just touch each other. And then attach the same fine thread to each of the remaining corks and suspend them from the inside of the can. And I think tape actually works well, but keep them away from where the wire is soldered. And then you tape that can with the corks attached to the dome of the Van de Graaff electrostatic generator. And here's the diagram of the actual one on the right and on the left. So you can see the belt, the dome of the generator, and the can taped on top. And in the diagram, you can see the corks. And when we turn on the Van de Graaff generator, what will we observe? With the first pair of corks outside the can and then inside. And so what's going to be happening to the charges, the polarity on the Van de Graaff generator, of the can, and the polarity of the corks, both inside and out. And so when we look at the diagram, we've got the moving rubber belt, which will become negatively charged with respect to the acrylic roller, which we can't see under the dome, and the positive charge left on the acrylic roller will be conducted to the dome of the generator. So what's going to happen to the corks inside the can, outside the can? And inside the can, nothing. They're not going to move. Outside the can, they move very vigorously, bouncing around and separate. Why? What have you got there? You can now see the charge on the coffee can becomes positive by touching the dome of the Van de Graaff generator. And that is indeed what happens to the corks as well outside. They become positively charged, so they're now going to repel each other. There's no charge inside, there's no conduction to the inside corks, so they are going to remain stationary.
Oh, can I just go for it?
Wait, why did that?
I think you're gonna blow the building up.
That's my job.
Not just, wait, no, wasn't there this experiment where Jello actually
Compare what's
conducted?
inside with what's outside.
Jello's gonna blow the building up and catch
Go
you.
look what's
That's my
inside.
job.
Jello's gonna what?
Blow the building up and catch you.
Go where Kaz is. Go around where Kaz is and have a look inside.
I said.
There's nothing inside.
You should give him money for that joke.
Yeah.
How's this make it?
Yes, he did. I said Jello's gonna blow the building up, and he said no. That's my job.
And there are Faraday cages here in the Discovery Palace in Paris, and you've got people inside who are unaffected by a very high voltage that is outside on the mesh. You can barely see that it's a mesh that is covering the Faraday cage. So keeping the inside of the cage very low voltage, no effect of the high voltage outside, also works with lightning strikes. And if we look at a school bus here, the lightning usually goes to extremities like antenna, something sticking up, but approximately 50,000 volts zapping the bus, and that behaves like our Faraday cage, and the electricity is going to be discharged to ground through the tyres. So it stays outside the Faraday cage, which is the body of a school bus, or indeed cars. And there are 40 million lightning strikes in the US each year. Most of them are, of course, in the middle of nowhere or hitting trees, etc. And then the same applies to airplanes. So the lightning is going to predominantly strike the extremities, but can pass over the metal shell of the aircraft. And on average, each airplane is struck twice a year, but little damage is done, although they are checked out thoroughly on landing. Sometimes the airplane is triggering a strike itself by building up static charge with movement through the clouds. And most of the lightning strikes occur at 1,500 to 4,500 meters, soon after taking off or as the airplane is descending. And very many thanks to the students, Mr. Godwin's physics class and Washington International School Team Science.